The Imperial Council chamber was a marvel of engineering, a colossal dome of transparent alloy suspended in the vast emptiness of space. Beyond its walls, the stars burned cold and distant, but inside, the air hummed with the weight of diplomacy and quiet tensions. Today, the atmosphere was heavier than usual. Today, the humans had arrived. Ambassador Ethan Carter stepped onto the polished black floor with the measured confidence of a man who had spent his life walking into rooms filled with enemies. His delegation followed, a small, carefully selected team of advisors and aides, each dressed in the deep navy blue formal wear of Earth's diplomatic corps. They moved like predators in the den of a much larger beast, their sharp eyes cataloging every glance, every twitch of alien muscle, every shift of weight in the gathered crowd. At the far end of the chamber, the Imperial High Chancellor, Zion Vathiz, watched them with the cold scrutiny of a scientist observing an unpredictable specimen. His race, the Exaverek, had ruled this sector for centuries, their influence woven into the very fabric of the Interstellar Council. Tall and imposing, Vathiz wore the ceremonial regalia of his station, a flowing robe of silver-threaded black, fastened at the shoulder by a crest of woven metal. His elongated, bone-white face betrayed no emotion, but his inner circle of advisors, less skilled in the art of composure, displayed a mixture of disdain and thinly veiled caution. "Ambassador Carter," Vathiz said, his voice smooth yet edged with condescension, "the Terran delegation is welcomed to this council. Your people's request for official status is a matter of much debate. But first, a matter of protocol." The words were unnecessary. Carter knew what was coming. He had studied the Empire's customs, dissected their laws, and anticipated every possible obstacle they would throw in humanity's path. He offered a polite nod as two Exaverek guards stepped forward, their sleek armor glinting under the chamber's golden light. "Per council law, no weapons may be carried beyond these doors," Vathiz continued. "Our security will ensure your compliance." Carter kept his expression neutral, though he felt the weight of his team's unspoken thoughts. They were soldiers as much as they were diplomats, each one aware that they were stepping into a room full of potential enemies with no means of defense, at least not in the conventional sense. He lifted his arms slightly, a gesture of cooperation, and his team followed suit. The guards moved methodically, scanning each human with a sleek, palm-sized device that hummed as it passed over their bodies. When it was done, the lead officer gave a curt nod. "They are clean." Vathiz allowed a faint smile. "Good. Then we may begin." The chamber's seating curved in a half-circle around the central dais, where a hovering holographic display projected the day's agenda. Representatives of various species filled the seats, some draped in the heavy robes of bureaucracy, others in the rigid uniforms of military governments. Carter took note of the Zorkai envoy, a massive reptilian humanoid with jet-black scales and piercing yellow eyes. The Zorkai had long opposed humanity's entry into the Council, claiming that Earth's rapid expansion made them a destabilizing force. Carter suspected their true concern was less about stability and more about competition. "We convene today," Vathiz said, gesturing to the hologram, "to determine whether the human species is fit to hold a seat among us. Your kind has expanded aggressively since first contact. Some among us believe you seek war, not peace. Others claim your ambitions will one day threaten the delicate balance we have maintained for generations." Carter folded his hands behind his back. "With all due respect, Chancellor, humanity has fought harder for peace than any species at this table. If expansion was our only goal, we would not be here. We would simply take what we needed." A murmur rippled through the assembly. The Zorkai representative, Varesh Alarin, leaned forward, his scaled lips peeling into a sharp-toothed grin. "And yet, Ambassador, it is only by the limitations placed upon your military that you do not already attempt such a thing. The Empire has seen your history, your wars. You breed conflict like a sickness." Carter met the reptilian's gaze without flinching. "Our history is marked by war, yes. But unlike some, we do not fear the lessons it has taught us." Alarin's grin widened, but before he could respond, the chamber doors slid open with a whisper of pressurized air. A single figure strode in, his movements purposeful yet somehow off, as if each step was calculated for effect rather than function. The man was human, or at least he appeared to be. But there was something wrong with his presence, something that sent an instinctive warning through Carter's nerves. The guards at the entrance hesitated, their postures shifting into something more alert. Carter's team tensed subtly, though their expressions remained controlled. His turned his gaze to the newcomer. "This session is closed to unauthorized personnel." The man smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Apologies, Chancellor. I only wished to observe." Allarin's expression darkened. "Identify yourself." The man spread his hands in mock innocence. "A simple courier. I was sent to deliver a message." Carter barely had time to react before the air shimmered around the man's hand. A concealed weapon flickered into existence, small, elegant, and unmistakably deadly. The guards moved, but too slowly. A bolt of energy cut through the chamber, striking a delegate from the far side of the room. Chaos erupted. The Council's security forces surged forward, weapons drawn. Alien representatives scrambled for cover. Allarin roared, his claws extending, while his barked orders in the Exiveric tongue. But Carter and his team, they did not move in panic. They moved in precision. One of his aides, Lieutenant Ramirez, was the first to act. She pivoted on her heel, grabbing a fallen chair and using it as an improvised shield as a second shot rang out. Another member of the team, Darius Cole, lunged forward, catching the shooter's wrist and twisting it with a brutal efficiency that sent the weapon skittering across the floor. The man grunted in pain, but his expression barely changed. No fear, no anger, just cold calculation. Carter barely had time to process before the shooter made his next move. He twisted free of Cole's grip and drove his knee upward, aiming for a lethal strike, only to be intercepted by Ramirez, who used her momentum to hurl him backward. He crashed against the central dais, sending the hologram display into a flickering mess of distorted light. The guards finally regained control, pinning the attacker to the ground. The room pulsed with tension. His, visibly seething, turned toward his security force. How did this happen? No one had an answer. Carter adjusted his cuffs, stepping forward as silence fell. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but sharp enough to cut steel. "And that, Chancellor, is why human diplomats are not allowed to carry weapons to this council." The silence that followed was absolute, a void of sound deeper than the vacuum beyond the station's reinforced walls. The alien representatives stood frozen in a tableau of disbelief, their minds struggling to reconcile what had just happened. The shooter lay subdued, his face pressed to the cold floor beneath the weight of two Exiveric guards. But Carter wasn't looking at him. His gaze swept the chamber, cataloging every reaction, every shift in posture. He could see it, fear, and not just from the attack. His face paler than before, stepped forward, his voice cold. How did this man enter the council chambers with a weapon? Who allowed this breach? No one answered immediately. The Imperial Guards, their rigid discipline momentarily shaken, exchanged uneasy glances. The Zorkai ambassador, Varesh Allarin, had risen to his full, imposing height, his claws twitching at his sides, but he said nothing. It was Carter who finally broke the silence. "I think the more pressing question, Chancellor," he said smoothly, "is who sent him." The words cut through the air like a blade. The shooter, still pinned, let out a breathless chuckle. "Ah, the famous human pragmatism," he murmured. His voice was too calm for a man in his position. Always asking the right questions. Carter crouched down, meeting the man's gaze. His dark eyes held no panic, no fear of what would happen next. That alone set him apart. "Then why don't you save us all the time and answer it?" The man smirked, then did something that made Carter's blood run cold. He bit down. A sharp crack echoed, followed by the unmistakable sound of flesh seizing. His body convulsed once, twice, then went still. The Exiveric guards cursed in their own language, recoiling as foam bubbled from the assassin's lips. Carter grabbed his wrist, searching for a pulse. Nothing. His turned sharply, his robes sweeping the floor. A failsafe, he said grimly. Whoever sent him did not intend for us to interrogate him. Allerin exhaled through flared nostrils. This was a coordinated strike. The humans were the target. His yellow eyes flicked to Carter. Curious, isn't it? That your kind brings chaos wherever it goes. Carter straightened, ignoring the jab. His mind was already working, piecing together what this meant. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was a message. A warning. But from whom? The Zorkai had always opposed humanity's place in the Council, but even they weren't foolish enough to risk open hostility inside the imperial seat of power. Ramirez moved closer, speaking low enough that only Carter could hear. That was too clean, Ethan. This wasn't some rogue extremist. That was professional. He knew she was right. The way the assassin moved, the way he fought, it was efficient, calculated. A soldier's efficiency, not a fanatic's desperation. Which meant someone with significant resources wanted humanity silenced. That his, composed once more, turned to his guards. Seal the chamber. No one leaves until we have identified how this happened. The ripple of discomfort was immediate. Representatives bristled at the idea of being detained, but none dared to protest outright. Carter, however, had no intention of standing idle. He stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of unshakable authority. Chancellor, with all due respect, locking down the chamber won't prevent another attack. This was coordinated. That means there are more pieces in play. You need to find them. That his narrowed his gaze. And what, exactly, do you propose, Ambassador? Carter exhaled slowly. This was the moment that mattered. The one that would decide whether humanity's presence here was seen as a liability or as something far more dangerous. Let us help. A murmur spread through the chamber. Allerin scoffed. You expect the Empire to entrust humans with their own security? You're unarmed. What can you possibly do? Carter smiled, but there was no warmth in it. If we needed weapons to be dangerous, you wouldn't be speaking right now. The chamber went still again. Carter held Allerin's gaze, unflinching. Let them think on that. Let them wonder what it meant. Because the truth was simple, humanity had never needed guns to win wars. His considered him for a long moment, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Very well, Ambassador Carter. Show us what humanity is capable of. The permission was all they needed. Ramirez, Cole, and the rest of the team shifted subtly, their postures relaxing into something that, to the untrained eye, might seem like casual observation. In reality, they were assessing, analyzing, watching every exit, every movement, looking for the next piece of the puzzle. Cole moved first, crossing the room with deceptive ease, his sharp gaze flicking over the remains of the assassin's body. He didn't flinch, he murmured. Most people, even trained operatives, show some sign of hesitation before they pull a suicide trigger. He knew exactly what he was doing. Ramirez was already scanning the room, her focus sharp. Means he wasn't alone. No way he'd risk a stunt like that without a contingency. Carter nodded. Then let's find the contingency before it finds us. The next hour was a slow, methodical unraveling of a hidden thread. The assassin had entered with credentials so flawless that even Imperial security hadn't flagged him. That meant internal cooperation. Someone had let him in, someone with the power to override standard checks. Cole traced the authorization logs while Ramirez moved through the chamber, scanning for anything out of place. It didn't take long to find it. A server access port, just beneath the main council dais, had been tampered with. A tiny, nearly invisible device had been slotted into the interface, transmitting an encrypted signal. Ramirez knelt, eyes narrowing. This wasn't just a hit. Someone was feeding information out of this room. Carter exhaled. Which means they're still listening. Before he could finish the thought, the lights flickered. A hum resonated through the chamber, low and unnatural. Then the alarms began. A cascading lockdown protocol engaged, sealing the exits with thick, reinforced barriers. The golden glow of the council chamber turned red as emergency lights flared to life. The alien representatives recoiled, some shouting in alarm. Security officers scrambled, weapons raised, searching for an enemy they couldn't see. But Carter knew. The real attack hadn't been the assassin. That had been the distraction. The real strike was happening now. Ramirez yanked the device from the server port, but the damage was already done. They've overridden station control. Carter turned to Vat-His, who for the first time since their arrival, looked uncertain. "Chancellor," he said, voice steady. "Someone just locked us in with the real threat, and we're going to need a hell of a lot more than weapons to survive it." The red emergency lighting cast long shadows across the chamber, warping the once regal architecture into something foreboding. The alarm's wail reverberated through the air, mixing with the frantic voices of the council members as realization set in. This was not just an attack. It was a siege. Carter didn't waste time. He turned sharply to Ramirez, his voice clipped. "What are we dealing with?" She was already working, fingers flying across the embedded console near the disabled server port. "The lockdown isn't standard protocol," she muttered. "This wasn't tripped by security. It was forced from an external override. Someone's taken control of the station's central systems." Cole was scanning the exits, assessing their options. "Which means we're blind, and whoever did this is calling the shots." Carter exhaled, his mind racing through the possibilities. This was bigger than an assassination. Someone had used the shooter as an opening move, but the real game was happening now. They had been herded into this room, sealed off and isolated. The council, the leadership of multiple interstellar factions, was now trapped together. And that meant only one thing. "They're not just trying to kill us," Carter murmured. "They want to control the narrative." Vat-His, standing rigid amidst the rising chaos, turned to him with a sharp glare. "Explain." Carter's jaw tightened. "If they wanted to wipe us out, they'd have triggered an atmospheric purge or a direct strike from external assets. But they didn't. They locked us down. That means they need this to look a certain way." Allerin snarled. "You think this is about politics?" Carter met his gaze evenly. "Everything is about politics." The Zorkai's lip curled in distaste, but he didn't argue. The truth was evident. This wasn't about destruction, it was about control. Someone wanted this event to unfold in a specific way, one that would reshape the balance of power. Then, the first explosion rocked the station. The chamber trembled, a deep, guttural reverberation that sent delegates stumbling. From beyond the sealed doors, the muffled sound of shattering metal echoed through the air. Then silence. A voice crackled over the chamber's embedded speakers, distorted but unmistakably synthetic. "Council representatives, remain where you are. Do not attempt to breach the lockdown. Resistance will not be tolerated." Carter's stomach turned to ice. It wasn't an attack force. It was an occupation. Vat-His stepped forward, his regal composure faltering. "This is Imperial territory. Who dares?" The voice cut him off. "The future of this council is being rewritten. Your compliance will ensure your survival." Ramirez looked up from the console, her expression grim. "They've severed all outgoing communications. No way to call for help." Cole exhaled through his nose. "Which means help isn't coming." The chamber was silent now. The representatives, some of the most powerful individuals in known space, stood in stunned realization. None of their influence mattered if they couldn't reach beyond these walls. Carter turned to Vat-His, his voice steel. "You still think this is just an internal security matter?" Vat-His didn't answer. The room held its breath. Then, from the far side of the chamber, a single voice broke through the tension. "I can get us out." Every head turned. A woman stepped forward, her presence sharp and controlled. She wasn't part of Carter's delegation. Her uniform marked her as a Tezhari operative, a species known for their cyberwarfare expertise. Her name, Carter recalled, was Lyrian Voss. Vat-His regarded her with suspicion. "And why should we trust you?" She didn't hesitate. "Because I know who's behind this." The chamber fell into a stunned silence. Carter stepped closer. "Go on." Lyrian's gaze swept the room. "This isn't an external attack. It's an internal coup." Murmurs erupted, but Carter didn't look away. "You have proof." She held up a small data drive. I intercepted transmissions an hour before the lockdown. Coordinated movements, encrypted orders. This was planned from within the Empire. Vathis' expression darkened. Impossible. Lyrian arched an eyebrow. Then explain why your own security forces aren't responding. That landed like a hammer. Vathis' jaw clenched, but he had no answer. Carter took a slow breath. Then we need to move. If this is an internal power play, it won't stop with the Council. The entire Empire could fall under new leadership by the time that door unlocks. Alarin crossed his arms. And how do you propose we move, human? We are unarmed and outnumbered. Carter met his gaze steadily. You think weapons make a soldier? The Zorkai ambassador studied him for a moment, then let out a low, rumbling chuckle. Very well, Carter. Show us what humanity can do. The plan formed swiftly. Lyrian's data drive contained a partial backdoor into the station's subsystems, enough to override minor security measures. It wasn't much, but it gave them a window. Ramirez and Cole took point, leading a contingent of the most physically capable representatives. Their objective was simple. Seize control of the nearest access point, break the external override, and retake command before their captors tighten their hold. They moved quickly. The Council Chamber's auxiliary hatch, normally used for maintenance, offered an unguarded escape route. Carter went first, the weight of the mission pressing down on him. He wasn't a soldier, but he had led men and women through worse. The mercenaries reacted instantly, shifting formation. Two broke away, heading toward the false alarm. The others remained, but their attention had fractured. That was all they needed. Cole struck first, a brutal, silent takedown. Carter followed, driving an elbow into the nearest enemy's throat before slamming him against the bulkhead. Ramirez moved like a shadow, disarming another before he could react. The entire engagement lasted less than 10 seconds. When it was done, they stood among the fallen. Carter exhaled. Move. Now. They reached the control center in minutes. Lyrian plugged into the main console, fingers blurring over the interface. I can override the lockdown, but it won't last long. Carter turned to Vathis. Then we make it count. The Chancellor met his gaze, something unreadable in his expression. Then slowly he nodded. Do it. Lyrian initiated the override. The lights flickered, then the station systems roared back to life. Security alerts triggered across all sectors. The mercenary forces would know they were compromised. Carter activated his communicator. Council chamber, do you read? A crackle, then a voice. Reading you, Carter. It was one of the Imperial Guards, their tone urgent. What the hell is happening? Long story. Regroup your forces. The coup isn't over. The guard hesitated. Then, understood. Carter turned back to his team. We're not done yet. The battle for the Empire had just begun.